The skewer was ordered by the Admiralty as a fleet fighter, stroke dive bomber. A fighter it wasn't. A dive bomber it was pretty good. In fact, I would go so far as to say probably after the Ju-87 it's the best I've experienced. But there was a big gap between them. Now, we had approached the Norwegian coast from Scotland uninterrupted or unharried at all. Carried out the dive bombing raid and were on the way home. And we were just getting down to run along the fjords when about 12 109s appeared. We guessed it was a 109E. It had 4 wing guns and a spinner cannon. We were pretty matched evenly because there were 12 of us, and we assumed that each one chose one. And I thought, well, now the only thing to do with this is to get very low down on the water so that he won't be able to get underneath us, get very close into the cliff itself so he can't come from one side at least. So you're restricting him quite a bit. And my observer said to me, I see him coming in from the stern, sir. And I said, right, tell me when you see him open fire. So he said, right, first flash. And immediately I got that, I popped the dive brakes. Now the dive brakes were good on the skewer in that they didn't give you a big change of trim, but they were very effective in decelerating the aircraft. And it was quite obvious this guy was going to have to take evasive action or we were going to collide. And of course the closeness of the fjord wall was also keeping him a little bit out. And he pulled away. But he hadn't left us because as we proceeded towards the mouth of the fjord, he came in again, and from the starboard quarter, he opened fire. Again, he was obviously having badly restricted by the fjord walls, etc. But I didn't see the cannon firing at all. Now that didn't surprise me because I knew they had a lot of trouble with cannon jamming. But his 4 wing guns were operating all right. And he struck us. And I felt a searing wound on my left arm at the time. But let's be clear, it was only a flesh wound. It was not an arterial wound. And my concern wasn't so much that as to whether he had penetrated the canopy we had. We had a sort of greenhouse canopy, and if he had smashed that, we would have picked up a lot of drag, and we were going to be very tight for fuel to get us back to Scotland. I also noticed that the bullets struck us just about the ledge where the fuselage and the canopy met. I darted along there. Now the first thing I did once he wasn't going to be able to get a head on at us and go around again. So he vanished. And I called my observer, no reply. So my thought was, well, he's either been hit or the communication system has been severed. And I kept calling him, nothing. And fortunately, between his astern attack and his head-on attack, my observer had given me a course to steer to Scotland in case this happened. And still making no allowance for wind changes or anything, just go. And I couldn't get anything out of my observer, so I thought he's either been killed or badly wounded. So we plodded on back. It was about two and a bit hours back to Scotland. Fortunately, his course was good enough to hit the Orkney Islands where we were. And we found the airfield. Once we found the islands, found the airfield quite comfortably. And what had happened to him was the bullet had grazed the front of his forehead, and the impact of the bullet had rendered him unconscious. Not that he had any more than a head wound, but he was out. And so we were both really very, very lucky indeed. It was just a huge bang, and the prop just went solid. And that was fine. That didn't worry me. I thought, all right, I can still glide down and probably crash land somewhere. But I had to penetrate about 3,000 feet of cloud. When you got in the dark of the cloud, I suddenly realized the whole engine cowling was glowing. And just to emphasize this, I had flying boots on, and I suddenly found my feet were cooking. And so I decided the time must come over the side. And over the side sounds simple, and I stood up in the cockpit, and I found I was pinned against the hood, which is open, of course, by just the glide speed. And you don't realize that you're pretty immobile at this time. So I thought, right, so the thing to do is lean into the cockpit, grab this stick, and hoik it over to one side, and that hopefully will project me out, which worked like a charm. But the silly part of it all came in the landing, which when I went into a very, very obnoxious smelling pond, and couldn't get out because every time I tried to reach terra firma, there was a very aggressive bull waiting for me. And even though I tried all around, he went around, he was waiting for me. And I had to laugh because it really was humorous. The fire brigade arrived, the ambulance arrived, Dad's army arrived, and everything was there. And all hiding behind the hedge because they saw the bull. So I shouted to them, "Go and get the farmer." So they went and got him. This son of the soil came down, a little chap, and he just went over to the bull. It had a ring in its nose, and he put his 2 fingers through, and he leaned down and said, "Come on, Ferdinand," and off they went together. It was question of lack of information. At that stage in the war, this was just before the capitulation, the Second Army was moving up north through Schleswig-Holstein into Denmark. The objective being this huge night fighter station called Grover. And we got there. In fact, we got there before the army. But nevertheless, we found it had some magnificent jet aircraft. And at that stage, I'd been told, while you're moving around Germany, look out for a possible fighter base. Well, not fighter base, a maintenance base for us to bring all the captured German aircraft to, where we can have a team that can look them over. So when I got to Grover, I thought, right, I have nothing to do now except find this field. I had noted one that looked a likely candidate called Schleswig. Now, if you draw a line between Grover and Schleswig, you come very near the town of Flensburg. And at that stage in the war, Grand Admiral Dönitz had been nominated by Hitler as his successor. So he had shacked up in the Naval Academy at Murvik, which is beside Flensburg, and was guarded by 2 crack SS units. And they had a fearful reputation, these SS units. So the Second Army said, we are not going to fight it out and lose a huge number of men. We'll starve them out. So they surrounded it and took no action, just, as we say, waited to starve them out. Now, I had been informed that Dönitz was there and that we were at standoff, but they didn't say how far off we were. And when I looked at my map, I saw there was an airfield at Flensburg, so I decided to land there, inquire what the situation was, and also look at this airfield as a possible candidate for the one I was looking for. Now, to the British people who had just vacated the airfield, the sight of a German fighter coming caused them to start a bit of weapon practice. The Germans suspected truly that there was somebody who shouldn't be in a German airplane coming in, and they started firing too. I think, irrespective of what the reason was, nobody wanted me to be anywhere near Dönitz. And they both sides opened fire, but this was a Focke-Wulf 190 D9. Now, in the whole war, I would say the finest Allied fighter I ever flew was this Spitfire Mark 14. This was a whisker behind the Mark 14. And the 190 had been a radial engine fighter throughout, up to that stage in the war. Suddenly, to gain the extra speed for it, they had changed to an inline engine. So it was quite different aeroplane, but went like a scalded cat. It really was good. I just got to full power. So approximately 15 seconds. I released the brakes and we moved forward. I would say we had probably gone about 5 aircraft lengths when there was this colossal explosion. Now, you sit very far forward in the Arado 234, so none of the flying metal of the bursting turbine came into the cockpit. It peppered the fuselage, but all behind me. And all I had to do, of course, was just put on the brakes and come to a halt. But already the fire had burned through the wing and part of the wing drooped onto the runway. So well, there was no time to lose, put it that way. Now you see, the problem was, again, when we said to everybody, the ground crew and everybody, how many hours it was done, they didn't know. No documents. The German axial flow jets, in fact, I think it's fair to say all jets at this stage in jet development had sensitive throttles, or rather engines that were sensitive to throttle movement, rapid movement in particular. Slow movement, fair enough. Now, when I say slow, you've got to realize in Britain, Germany, and the United States, we all had the same problem with jet engines. The acceleration and deceleration rate using the throttle was so slow. If you got onto the end of a runway with any jet from these countries and wanted to open up for takeoff, you required a full 15 seconds for the engine to spool up to max power. Now this was pretty bad, and one had to realize too, the other aspect was the jet axial flow engines had a scrap life of 25 hours. Now, since the Germans destroyed all service records, so we couldn't find out how many hours any of them had done, we were in a bit of a risk area. And to show how sensitive these engines were, at the end of the war, I spoke to Adolf Galland, who had a Messerschmitt 262 outfit called JV-44. And he said that as combat pilots, they couldn't risk engine failures, otherwise they would be dead ducks. So he ordered his pilots to use full power on takeoff, start the climb. When you were comfortably into the climb, gently ease the throttles back to stay at climb power. Lock the throttles and never touch them for the rest of the sortie. Now, you're going to pay for this somehow or other. And he said, oh yes, we did. Instead of having 50 hours out of an engine, we were getting 12 to 15 hours. So it's a poor trade-off. But he said we just couldn't fight with engines that were so sensitive to the throttle. We were left with a dead engine just when we had been trying to go round again because of a tractor being operated on the runway. And when the engine failed, if I hadn't taken any action, we'd have hit high ground ahead of us. Wouldn't have been able to climb out. So we went barreling into this haystack, and I had some very senior scientists aboard, and they took it all in their stride. In fact, the impact wasn't anything as bad as I expected. I thought this is the only way out, and we might get away with it. And the passengers, I thought, certainly would get away with it. I wasn't sure we and the glass nose would, but the plexiglass didn't break even. The propellers acted a bit like threshing machines, and there was straw all over the place. So we had to halt for quite a while we defluffed the whole thing. And in particular, I had a German fitter aboard. He reckoned it was the spark plugs, and he took them out from the defective engine. And although we had nothing really in the way of tools very much, it was all hands to the pumps, and we asked these guys for pipe cleaners, nails, files, and all that sort of thing, and managed to get the plugs cleaned up. So it saved the day. It's just as well that we didn't have a severe accident, because one of the boffins was the man that really invented the flexible deck, the angled deck, which has saved naval aviation.